Hi, everyone. Welcome to Behind the Scenes with Healthy School Meals for All, What You'll Need to Be Successful, hosted by the Food Research and Action Center. I'm Steve Hayward, Communications Manager at FRAC. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 60 minutes. We are recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides in a follow-up email. Closed captioning is available. To turn captions on, select Show Captions in the bottom taskbar. At the end of the presentation, there will be time for questions and answers. To ask a question, please use the Q&A tab also in the bottom taskbar. With that, I'll pass it off to Alexis Bylander, Senior Policy Analyst and Healthy School Meals for All campaign Senior Manager at FRAC.
Great, thanks Steve, and thanks everyone for joining this webinar this afternoon. Really excited to talk about this topic. So first up, next. Great. Just a little background about the Food Research and Action Center for any of you that aren't familiar with our organization. We are a national anti-hunger organization advocating on behalf of all of the federal nutrition programs. So SNAP, WIC, CACFP, summer meals, and then what we'll be talking about mostly today is school breakfast and school lunch. FRAC is a big champion and advocate for healthy school meals for all policies at the state and federal level, and we have a variety of information and helpful resources available at frac.org. Today, I am really happy to be joined by Shannon Solomon with Aurora Public Schools in Colorado and Jeannie LaPointe with Western Foothills School District in Maine. What we'll be doing this session is I'll first be going through some slides and giving some overall information about healthy school meals for all, but the bulk of today's webinar will be a panel discussion with Shannon and Jeannie. So when I think about healthy school meals for all, I think we're really at a point with this issue where there's kind of two areas. First is the incredible momentum and energy and interest in this idea and the belief that school breakfast and lunch should be free to all students, regardless of household income, just as a permanent part of the school day. And here you can see two pictures from recent bill signings of healthy school meals for all legislation into law, both in Minnesota and in New Mexico. And so I would like to take some time to give just some quick background about how these policies work and how they come to be. But then, like I said, if we go to the next slide, want to spend the bulk of today's webinar talking about implementation, really where the rubber hits the road and how we're going to implement free breakfast and lunch for all students as effectively and efficiently as possible. And it's really exciting that we're at a place where so many states have policies like this and we can really dive into implementation. Next. So I'm sure that everyone here can think of some of the benefits of providing free meals to all students, but here are some of the ones that FRAC likes to point to the most. First, of course, is ensuring that all students are hunger-free and ready to learn. We also believe that it reduces any stigma that may be associated with eating school meals. It ends unpaid school meal debt. That is a significant problem currently for families and for schools. It supports innovative service models, and it also advances racial equity by ensuring that all students have the meals that they need to get the most out of their school day. And this is definitely not a new issue. If you have read Dr. Janet Poppendick's book, Free for All, Fixing School Food in America, which is a history of school nutrition in the US, she notes that there have been calls for free school meals since at least the 1940s. So this is not a new idea, but because in large part, I think to the pandemic, we've really seen a lot of momentum on this issue in the last few years. Next. So as we all know, the pandemic really changed the landscape of so many things, but including school nutrition. COVID-19 highlighted the critical role that school meals play for children. And the free school meals that were available for a little over 2 school years during the height of the pandemic really served as a trial run for what a nationwide free school meals for all policy could be. Next. And after the experience during the pandemic, students, parents, teachers, administrators, community members really realized that they did not want to go back to a system of tiered payments for meals. And when FRAC did public opinion polling a couple of years ago, we found that 63% of voters nationwide support legislation that would make free school meals permanently available to all students. Next. You've also likely seen the steady stream of supportive headlines in the media. Here are just a couple of my favorites. School meals should remain free for all children today and always. This was a headline during the pandemic. Next, free school meals when the feds step back, states step up, and states are fighting to bring back free school meals. Next. So how do these policies get passed? Well, FRAC sees three main pathways for achieving healthy school meals for all. The first is state legislation, where there's definitely the most energy right now, and that is each state passing their own policy one at a time. The next is federal legislation, so Congress passing legislation that would create nationwide free school meals for all kids in all states. And then the third pathway is incremental expansion of existing programs until we reach 100% free. And an example of that could be expanding eligibility for the community eligibility provision until larger and larger groups of students receive free meals. Next. So first, let's look at state legislation. And the map on the next slide gives you a good idea of where their energy is for healthy school meals for all across the country. So the states that have permanent healthy school meals for all policies currently include California, Maine, Colorado, Minnesota, New Mexico, Vermont, and Michigan. And that's really what we're going to be spending the bulk of today's webinar talking about, is policies in those states. It's also good to know that Nevada, Massachusetts, and Connecticut have passed temporary healthy school meals for all policies. And the states that are highlighted in green are places where healthy school meals for all legislation has been introduced, and or there are active coalitions working to pass that type of policy. Next. So how do these school meal bills get passed? They can be standalone bills, like what happened in Minnesota. They can be part of larger budget bills. That's what happened in California. Or they can be ballot measures that are voted on by the people, and that is what happened in Colorado. And what is included in this type of legislation? Well, the core component is providing state funding to cover costs between federal reimbursements and the cost of providing free meals to all students. And then some states have included other components, such as funding for staff training, equipment, local food procurement, wages, evaluation, etc. And who's involved in passing this type of legislation? What's really cool about this issue is that lots of people are eager to get involved. We have seen state coalitions include anti-hunger advocates, school nutrition association chapters, PTAs, unions, teachers, healthcare organizations, child advocacy organizations, farm to school groups, and the list really goes on and on. The next pathway is federal legislation. And there's a couple of things happening at the federal level. So the Biden White House hosted a White House conference on hunger, nutrition, and health. And out of that event came a national strategy document that talked about ways to end hunger in America. And one of those ideas was advancing a pathway to free healthy school meals for all. And the document said that the Biden-Harris administration will take a major step by working with Congress to expand access to healthy free school meals for 9 million more children by 2032. The other thing going on at the federal level, next slide, is congressional action. And it's great that the Biden White House is supportive of free school meals, but free school meals nationwide would require an act of Congress. Currently, Representative Omar and Senator Sanders have introduced the Universal School Meals Program Act, which would do many things, but one of which would establish free school meals for all students. And that is a piece of legislation that FRAC strongly supports. Next. And just in the last few months, FRAC has convened 17 other national organizations, and you can see their names and logos here, into a National Healthy School Meals for All coalition that really formalizes work that we have done with these partner organizations for the last several years to advocate and lobby for nationwide healthy school meals for all. Next. And then finally, the last pathway is incremental expansion. And if you go to the next slide, one example of this is the USDA proposed rule that would lower the minimum identified student percentage participation threshold for CEP from 40% to 25%. This is something that FRAC strongly supports, although we also know that increasing the CEP multiplier will be really important to allow more schools to participate in this provision. So next. Implementation, the meat and potatoes of this webinar. Excited to get to this topic. And what I put together is first, a reminder of the states that we're talking about here: California, Maine, Colorado, Minnesota, New Mexico, Vermont, and Michigan. And then of course, CEP schools in all states that have been or will be offering free meals to all students in those schools. And lessons learned and ideas from this webinar are applicable there too. Next. So I wanted to note here at the top that this is an example of really building the plane while flying. There's a lot that we're figuring out about Healthy School Meals for All while we implement it. And when I told a colleague that I plan on having this kind of a slide here, she said, well, remember to note that we have known for years that school nutrition officials are just the best at being innovative and meeting students' needs and providing great food. And they really demonstrated the incredible flexibility and innovation that they're capable of during the pandemic. And so we know that school nutrition staff are really the heroes of the in schools, and that they're really ready to rise to any challenge that comes with Healthy School Meals for All. Next slide. So when I think about what we know and what we're learning with Healthy School Meals for All, I kind of think of three different areas. The first is that, so many practices from traditional meal operations under a free, reduced priced, and paid system continue to work in a Healthy School Meals for All model. The second area is the emerging tips, ideas, and best practices for Healthy School Meals for All that we've learned from pandemic operations, from community eligibility provision schools, and from the first few years of states implementing Healthy School Meals for All policies. And then the third area are some system-wide needs that we'll need to identify and address that may be new because of now serving free meals to all students. Next. So here are some considerations when thinking about Healthy School Meals for All. First, on this next slide, you'll see student participation. So student participation is likely to increase, which is great, when meals are free to all students. The school year 2021 to 2022 operations that were under, for most schools, the seamless summer option waiver may be a good indicator of what participation would look like if free meals were available to all your students. And of course, in CEP schools, you're not likely to see much change because those students have had access to free meals previously. The next issue is, we can go to the next slide, is meal service. So when all kids have access to free meals, there's opportunity to put into practice some innovative service models. Some examples could be breakfast in the classroom, hallway kiosks, meal vending machines, and a lot more. The next issue is maximizing federal reimbursements. So some state legislation that has passed for Healthy School Meals for All requires or encourages schools to participate in either CEP or Provision 2. So determining student eligibility through forms or direct certification will continue to be important, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. The next issue is menus and meal quality. So as always, you'll want to consider menu items that maximize participation. And also higher participation may create an economy of scale that allows for more fresh produce and appealing menu items. Jeannie submitted a photo here of a fan favorite from Western Foothills. This is a sesame chicken with dumplings meal that is popular with the students. An increased volume may require additional storage space or equipment. Next is staffing. So we know that labor shortages continue to be an issue in many areas. Higher student participation may lead to more hours for existing staff, if that is allowable, or additional staff, or innovative staffing models, such as moving staff to different schools throughout the day. Next. And the last thing I wanted to highlight was communication and partnerships. So it'll be important to communicate to students and families that free meals are available to all students, and to have proactive conversations with teachers and administrators to address any challenges that you expect or encounter. I wanted to flag our website, freeschoolmealsforall.org, where we have a variety of resources and want to continue to build out an implementation section around healthy school meals for all. So with that, now I want to turn to the best part of today's webinar, which is the panel discussion with Shannon and Jeannie. And I thought what I could do is first ask you, Shannon, let's start with you, to talk about what is the state of healthy school meals for all in Colorado? And just briefly, what role did you play in bringing healthy school meals to all to fruition through the FF ballot measure in Colorado?
First of all, thanks, Alexis, for having me a part of the webinar. And second of all, Free Meals for All passed last November in Colorado, like you said, on a ballot. And we will be starting Free Meals for All here on August 8th, 2023. So super excited for breakfast and lunch. And I think the biggest thing for me is I'm a mother of 5 incredible children and adults now, but I really campaigned this as the parent. And really one of the things that Alexis and I have talked about is I'm not really a political person. I didn't get involved in that aspect. I would just talk to anybody that would listen to me. And I'm a firm believer in when you're doing the right thing and focused on the right thing, the outcome is there. And so I feel like Free Meals for All was something that when I was talking to people, I would say, you know, I tried to explain it in the simplest terms of understanding what it meant. And the biggest thing I said is free meals is not for poor kids. It's not for kids that are needy, or however people define that. And the misnomer, the misconception that was out there that I was hearing is the school lunch program is for kids who really need it, or are you know, economically challenged or poor, whatever people were saying. It's not. Nutrition and wellness and filling your tummy is for all children. And one of the things I would say when they would listen is I said, what about little Sarah, or what about little Tommy's who left their lunch on the table and their parents are middle class, and so they don't want their kids, you know, charging. And so as a child, your kid doesn't want to charge. And so I would say now that kid, the playing field is for all kids. I mean, our state has said breakfast and lunch is a part of your school day. If you need it, doesn't matter why, go get it. And so that is the way that I explained it is for all children. Maslow's hierarchy of needs says every human, little or big, right? Their 2 necessities are nutrition and safety. And it is our obligation as adults to provide that for our students so they're not sitting in the classroom with hungry bellies. So anyone, Alexis, over the last year that would listen to me, any party I was at, any community involvement, any teacher, any community member, I would, and any Coloradan for that matter, who would listen to me, I would plead to them as a parent, as a grandparent, as a community member, this is the right thing for us to do. And we showed the need, right, through COVID. And I would read the letter that I got from one of the parents that said, you know, my husband lost his job. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I drive a Lexus. And I was afraid to come through one of your drive-throughs during COVID because we have a Lexus, and I was embarrassed. And she wrote in the letter, but your team made me feel like a human and made me feel like I belonged. And it's a breaking down the barriers to hear. And she said, it helped us save our house because you and your team provided groceries during COVID. You provided groceries that allowed us to still maintain our mortgage payment before unemployment, before all of the things that needed to keep that family afloat. But the bottom line is nourishment, it looks different for all children. And so that is what free meals for all. And so my lobbying or political or whatever you call it is just talking about it. And there probably was not a day that went by that I was not talking to somebody.
Thank you. And August 9th is coming up. So you are just a few days really away from starting implementation. All right. Well, the situation is a little bit different in Maine because Maine passed their Healthy School Meals for All policy a little bit earlier. So Jeannie, do you want to talk about where you're at in Maine and how you were involved in bringing the policy to reality?
Sure. And thanks again, Alexis, for including me in this conversation. I was not directly involved. Other members of Maine School Nutrition Association were, and anti-hunger organizations such as Full Plates, Full Potential, or all played a part in making this legislation happen. Our particular district had been in the community eligibility program for 4 of our 6 schools before Free Meals for All passed. So we had already sort of scaled that mountain, if you will, but we still had 2 schools that we had very similar issues before the pandemic. They were a tiered system. They were not eligible for community eligibility. And it was a struggle. Always a struggle for those families. And so when this legislation was passed, it was, just a relief to know that you were able to offer universal meals across the board. We had always offered universal breakfast at our schools, but to know that everyone was on the same playing field in your school district was truly a relief from the family that drove a Lexus to the family that couldn't get a car out of their driveway. And I know that everyone in the state of Maine is feeling that same relief, not having to worry about the child who won't come through the lunch line because they don't have the money to pay for the meal, or they're all of those barriers that I have seen in my 21 years of experience as a school nutrition director. We've all lived that. And it's such a relief that we don't have to live that anymore. And I hope that many more states follow in this, because children should just be able to come to school, get off the bus or walk to their school. And just like they have, the ride to school, they should have the food that the school can provide.
Great. So Jeannie, starting with you, what differences did you note during the pandemic when probably, people on this call are thinking, okay, well, we did free school meals for all during the pandemic. You've done it both during the pandemic and then during the next school year when California and Maine were the only states that were starting to implement statewide healthy school meals for all. What were the differences or similarities in that kind of meal service?
Our particular school district did go into a remote status for quite some time. So we were out delivering meals. So we were sort of a mixed bag during the pandemic. I would say that folks were a little confused initially coming back. It took a while for people to get the information, to absorb the fact that they didn't have to pay for meals any longer. As much as you think you're getting the information out to families, they don't always quite understand the system in which we work in and live in. But it has not taken families long to realize that this is a permanent feature for children and families in the state of Maine. And while we haven't seen a huge increase in participation, because 4 of our schools were community eligibility before we saw that bump up when we went to community eligibility. 80 to 85% of our children at our elementary schools in our community eligibility schools eat with us. So those are pretty high numbers.
Yeah, great. And so Shannon, you're in a different situation. You served free school meals for all during the pandemic. Then this last school year, you went back to determining if students were free, reduced priced, or paid. And now you and your team, you're gearing up to do free school meals for all again, back in, normal school operations. So what kind of things are you telling your team? What are you planning for? What are you preparing for with this new model?
So we went, planning, and strategically, we went through a calculation of what I did is I took, the difference, what we were serving for when we pre-pandemic, and then what we did in the pandemic. And then I took that percentage of increase, right? So that percentage of increase, it's at anywhere, depending on the school, like Jeannie was saying, if the school was already CEP, we didn't see we had 10 sites that were CEP. Out of our 63 locations. And so, we didn't see such a great, but the increase overall, and we did site by site, right? Like, so what does that increase look like at COVID versus, and so we took that percentage, and it varied anywhere from a 7.5% increase to an 18 to 19% increase in participation, which we've seen at some of our high schools. So then what we did is we geared up to try to say, okay, at those sites that are going to have, that potentially could have with free meals for all going back, a 19% increase. Let's look at what that looks like for staffing, right? So we've been really, since November of last year, really looking at what our staffing levels were across the board, but individually at each school. And so we're trying to be more strategic of what we learned in COVID, where we got caught building the plane as we were flying it. So, you take the lessons and the experiences you've learned, and then we've taken those percentages of growth and then applied them for where we were this year, right? So where we kind of came in at what we were serving this year when we were ringing everybody through under the free, paid, and reduced. So that's what we're looking at for each site. We've strategically used a lot of the money that we had made through, not made, but, we had for updating some equipment, right? So taking those schools that had the biggest increase in participation over COVID and that demographic of what do those pieces of equipment look like, and what can we get with supply chain quickly? That will be our biggest return on investment, reinvesting that money back into our program. So we've been trying to upgrade, and then we created this list of that. We're also working on, building a, commissary potentially and a warehouse. We've bought some backup portable walk-in freezers and walk-in refrigerators for those bigger schools. We also in Colorado are also doing preschool. So we're serving a lot more pre-K kiddos coming in August. So with it all, there's so many different things to sit down and strategically, but the learnings we had, COVID was not good, but it was a blessing in a lot of ways to look at and prepare us as much as we can be. We don't know exactly what, we call it the swag, right? You know what it is, scientific wild guess. We'll just go with that. But we're trying as hard as we can to foresee. The biggest communication is to our team is we're excited. And our kickoff is Beauty in the Beast. And the Beast is, just this beautiful, we get to feed every kid for free this year. And it is a beast. It's going to be hard to tackle as our team. We're realists. And so our kickoff of our training for this year is going to be that, the Beauty in the Beast of how are we going to do it? We're not trying to ignore the fact that this is going to be big for us, but it's also such a beautiful thing. And I don't remember the exact date you said, Alexis, but this has been talked about as a need since that year. And so we're just trying to get excited about it and not completely optimistic where it's like, oh, we're just walking around with our heads in the clouds so excited. You also have to be a realist and all of the challenges that are in front of us to conquer and go over. And I agree with both of you and everybody on this call that lunch ladies and lads across this country and world are superheroes, and we can make pretty much anything happen.
Great. Well, so I had shared on the slides considerations that I thought are probably top of mind for people participating in this webinar: time in line for students, enough time to eat, storage, staffing, menu, equipment, etc. Shannon, you already talked a little bit about staffing and equipment, but Jeannie, what do you have to add to the conversation about any of those topics?
So we learned after we had some schools go into the CEP program that our participation jumped up so quickly that we had to deal with more kids eating in the same amount of time. And we were able to incorporate a 30-minute lunch period into our wellness policy across our district. And that has really been helpful. It's been a bit of a challenge for our administrators, and I mean all of us. It's 30 minutes is a big chunk of the day, and it requires supervision, and it requires a different mindset. Our staff don't have to be throwing food on the trays anymore. They've got time now to feed our students and not beat on their bodies, if you will. But it's great. Our high schoolers enjoy that camaraderie time with their peers. So that was a really big piece for us. Staffing in some of our schools was an issue, and we've addressed that. And space and the increased production needs. And that's been an ongoing issue. We've had freezers and coolers expanded. We're a far smaller district than the Colorado district here. 60 schools. We're 6, and but it's been a work in progress for us in terms of bringing all of our schools, our production kitchens, on the same playing field with the same equipment so they can all prepare the same meals and more meals.
Yeah, and I'll just say having people from different size districts was intentional here, right? Because I'm sure that people who are listening want to hear how this works in a larger district and then in a smaller one too, because you each have your own unique opportunities and challenges based on the size of your operation. I know that an issue that is top of mind for kind of all stakeholders interested in feeding kids at school is individual student data, right? So for better or for worse, free and reduced price percentages are used for a lot of things outside of school nutrition, even though it's a responsibility that then lands with school nutrition staff. And as I said in my slides, a lot of state legislation either requires or encourages schools to continue to maximize CEP or Provision 2. So the collection of school meal forms and directly certifying students, all that work in large part continues. Can you each talk a little bit about, what's worked for you, what hasn't, any advice that you have for others? Shannon, do you want to start?
Sure. So we actually started before COVID on a campaign that we started really going after. I was looking at the data on free, reduced, and paid. And what we started to do is we started to go after what was our return on the application as an enrollment. So we have just under 40,000 students enrolled in our district. And so I was trying to figure out what that number was and go after that. And so we really started to campaign that the application wasn't just for a free meal. We started to say it's and you hear this across a bunch of districts and people who have done this. And so we started to, it's more than an application for meals. It impacts your entire district and the benefits for your entire district. And so we really started that 6 years ago when I became a director, and I would say really got after it the year right before COVID. And and again, it's all about partnerships, right? It takes a village. So we empowered our family liaisons, our principal secretaries. We started recruiting anyone that would. At the beginning of the school year, I said overtime is off we can do the overtime for any community events that you or your kitchen staff want to be at to educate, to collect those applications to help them. We trained everybody on how to fill one out, online and on paper. And we really, as a district, came together on doing that. And we started around 60% return. And last year, even through COVID, we did not drop. We continued to climb to increase. We continued to increase getting applications in when it was free meals for all. And we, at our CEP sites, and I'm sure Jeannie will speak on this, we called it a data economics survey, right? So it wasn't a free and meal. So we were able to combine because we had CEP schools and traditional schools. And so we finished last year at 87% of our enrollment. Whether, when, again, it's about talking, it's about that narrative that you communicate to your community that we need you to fill this out. And anyone that would listen, it's like, I'm not concerned whether your family qualifies for a free meal. I'm concerned that you put that data on paper. Whatever that data is, we need the data. And I would kind of talk about the fact that it was like an economic survey for our district. I'm a community member in the district I serve. And so I would, again, it's about that communication and that constant communication of a group, not just my department, but all of the partners that we had supporting us, our departments, our administration, our communications department. And like I said, our family liaisons who were right there at the heartbeat of our kiddos and our families were our biggest partnership. And so if anyone ever listens to this, we love our family liaisons, and it's been an incredible partnership with them. And so we finished off pretty proud last year at 87%. My goal was 90, and we're striving. And again, we're going after that just as hard this year. And we start from July 1st, sending out reports that says, here is the percentage of your school that has filled out an application in your families. We don't give any other data, that just has filled out that application. And we go after that number, not what their free and reduced percentages. We started that campaign.
Well, 87% seems pretty high. Jeannie, what do you have to add?
That's pretty admirable. So in our district, when we went into the community eligibility provision, we had the data collection form that was managed not by nutrition, but by our data collection specialist. And those schools that had to collect those forms collected them on the open house first day of school opportunities, especially for our elementary. And they had excellent participation, close to 100% return. An ice cream cone social with mom or Grammy gets them in the door every time. And they're just so thrilled to be coming back to school that has worked really, really well for us. And of course, we have to collect them every year. So the story continues. And for our two schools that are in Provision 2, last year was their base year. And we used a lot of support and information from Full Plates, Full Potential. They created a packet describing the importance of the free and reduced application. We did a lot of work through our administrative team to help them help us. After all, it's not just school nutrition's data, as we know, as Shannon has shared. It's the district's data, and it's the district's programming that's at stake with the free and reduced information. So we had really good return, and our numbers stayed stable from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. But we're now no longer needing to collect because we're in year 1 of Provision 2. But my administrative assistant continues to maintain our direct certification numbers because, of course, CEP always has to be renewed and recertified. So that's our responsibility. But there are supports, and there's information out there, and there are directors using all sorts of tips and tricks to help districts that are struggling.
Great. Well, there's been some great questions put in the chat in the Q&A box, so I want to start getting to those. And the first is around messaging to families. And Jeannie, you had mentioned that it took a little while for people to realize, once Maine state policy had passed, that free meals really were free to everybody, and this was just going to be a permanent part of the school day moving forward. As you reflect back, can you think of anything that you could have anything that you could have done to help shorten the amount of time for people to really have that message sink in? And there's also a question in the chat asking about how do you convey that this is free reimbursable meals at school and not free food for all. I think maybe what that question is getting at, because I have heard this from others, is you can't just come and take a milk or a snack. The rules about what is a reimbursable meal still apply. I don't know if that's what this person was asking specifically about or something else. Maybe they can elaborate more. But yeah, so the question is about messaging, so people know right on day one, any lessons learned, and then anything that you encountered around making sure that students take the full reimbursable meal.
That's a great question, because that was a struggle this year, and it's always a struggle when you become a CEP school. A free meal is not just a carton of milk; it is the meal in its component form. It's constant work, and part of my work this year is to do more education with stakeholders, PTO groups, parent groups, or just around the whole free meals for all, because I think the message is still not completely, is not out there for all. So it's still a work in progress. We use our social media pages, which automatically feed into our buildings, but not everybody accesses that, and you have to be in their space and where they are, and that's one of our pieces of work for this next school year.
Alexis, can I ask Jeannie a question? Jeannie, did your cashiers and the ones verifying the reimbursable meals? Sorry, because I'm just getting ready to start. So I'm going to take. Did your cashiers feel some extra weight? I mean, I'm just thinking through this right now that you're saying this, of trying to make sure that those were reimbursable meals as they were leaving. Did you alleviate the point of sale? Did you go to clickers? How did you kind of, sorry.
Oh no, we have clickers at our elementary school, and we created the full meal at the elementary before they exited, and then the bar was the fruit and veggie bar was additional items. At our middles and high schools, we used our point of sales systems, and there was always the occasional student who thought that the carton of milk, that they just swing by and grab a carton of milk out of the milk cooler, or they just grab an apple, and we had to do a little bit of work. Oh, it's free, but it's free, so that is always going to be a challenge for cashiers. And it didn't take long for, we're smaller district, so we know all of our students by name. A larger district will be more challenged than we have been.
Right. There was a question in the chat about how free school meals for all ended up on the ballot in Colorado, and I can give just a short answer on that. Advocates in Colorado first tried to pass the bill through the legislature and weren't able to do that, but they were able to get it to be referred as a ballot measure. And Colorado is a unique state in the way that paying for new programs works legislatively. And so the ballot measure was a kind of cool opportunity for their state, and worked well in large part because of the massive amount of effort that was put into it. I think in general, probably legislation is going to be a better fit for most states than ballot initiatives. But I'll also say, we're learning as we go here, right? And so we will learn as more states test out different ideas. There was another question in the chat about staffing and unions. And I know from being a part of the National Healthy School Meals for All Coalition that has 2 unions currently involved in it, NEA and AFT, that there is at least in part strong support for this from some unions, and we plan on reaching out to more to see if they want to be a part of it. I don't know if you have anything to say about increasing staff hours or hiring more staff, or how that would interact with unions in your district. Jeannie, do you want to start?
We did hire more staff this year. We have more students attending our vocational CTE programming, and it's a good problem. But they're off-site, so we needed to add staff. No one was complaining. They were clearly overworked. We were able to actually add 2 positions this year. And that's been a real level of support for universal meals, but 2, when you're trying to increase scratch cooking, it just has worked very well for us.
And Shannon?
Yes, we added 1 to 4 staff on each site. And like we said, we went site by site. We increased hours to those who wanted it first. We created a second shift at our high schools from 10 o'clock in the morning till 6:30 at night. And we actually hire high school kids at our high schools from 3:35 whenever they get out of school, their first job, right? They're a student, and they come and work for us in the evening times. And I have an assistant manager running those shifts. So we created kind of a second shift, and they prep up our fresh fruits and vegetables. They make our dressings, they make our sauces, as much as they can. And they can also help out some of the elementary schools within the area, and managers can pick it up. You get creative with staffing, right? So in the staffing market, we're starting the school year still understaffed. I think that's where a lot of districts are, not all, but we would have been staffed off our old staffing levels. But we're starting to really ramp up, and we're gonna see. This is our first year, so I'm excited to learn more from Jeannie, but it is definitely a concern. But I think, like she said, that we're giving more hours to the folks that want it. We're not asking people to work more that don't want it. And it's really meeting your team where they're at, and then trying to really, one of the things that I do is, I've been in restaurants since I was 14. And so I really challenge the managers at each one of the sites that this is their community that they work in at their school. Find us some staff at, your community. Talk to your teachers, your admin, your churches, your rec centers, your community centers, your community groups, your YMCAs. Find those people, and it doesn't matter if they want to work 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, only a couple days a week. We have one of the most flexible schedules, and we're looking for help all the time. And so I know staffing is a marketing thing, and so it's really challenging each of those kitchen managers to find the help that they want and empowering them. I've been a restaurant manager almost my whole life, and no one said to me ever, "Oh, by the way, here's your staff," other than where I work now. And so I've really been kind of trying to look through that lens I was a kitchen manager when I first started in school nutrition. And so I was always, do you want to work? You want to work? You want to work?
Okay, well, from the chat, it looks like, I'm not sure which one of you referenced a fruit and veggie bar, maybe Jeannie, because I think you submitted a photo of that, and then also a reference to portable fridges, and people are eager to hear more. So what is a fruit and veggie bar? How does that operate in the line? And then where did you get and use portable fridges?
All of our schools offer fruits and vegetables on a self-serve bar. Our entree is served through the line, and at our elementaries, as I mentioned, we put the fruit or veg to make the complete meal, and they go out and self-serve off the fruit and veggie bar. It's always been a component of our program. We had to put the bars away during COVID. There were just too many risks, but we're glad that they're back. And as far as the refrigerators, I think that was not me. But it really allows you to maximize the use of your USDA commodities, and just give a great variety for your students.
Love it. Shannon, did you talk about portable fridges? Yeah.
Yeah, freezers and fridges, and it's really helped as well when the heat puts one of your coolers out. You can move this so you're not moving stuff so far and losing product. But the other piece is it's really helped us with on the schools that are going to increase participation so quickly. And I will tell you that we've used 2 different product brands. And if you'd love to reach out to me, I'm not going to sell those product brands right now, but we've used 2 of them. Reach out to myself or my project manager. We can give you, a reference on those products. But yeah, and to be honest, the only reason I'm not saying it is because I don't know exactly the type that they are.
Good. Well, one of the things that I love about once you have free school meals for all accomplished, huge accomplishment, then there's just so many fun other topics to talk about, which is enough time to eat and scratch cooking and different menu items. Like it just frees up all of this brain space for, just the really fun parts of this, like once access is accomplished. So one of the questions in the chat was about time to eat. I know some states or school districts have a requirement of how much time students need to have to eat. And other states are in the process of pursuing legislation around that topic. So there was a question to you, Jeannie, for your time to eat policy of 30 minutes. Who were the main champions of that helped to establish it? And were there any arguments against it? I think when it comes to the school day, every minute is so valuable and so many different stakeholders want to have those minutes. So what did you hear both for and against a time to eat policy?
So I'll be frank, we had a really, really strong wellness policy, and it was time to revise. And we knew that best practice for the amount of time to eat was 30 minutes. I went out on a limb, and our wellness policy team is not as deep and does not involve enough stakeholders, and we're working on expanding that. But it passed through our school board, and it was a significant change. It's creating, every year it creates some ripples, some challenges, but I don't think that there's anyone who can argue that our smallest children need the most time to eat, and they're now getting it. So at our middle school, that's a little larger, it's a bit of a struggle, but this year we're combining, condensing a couple of grade levels so that we can go from 4 lunch periods to 3. And I think that will accomplish, they'll still get 30 minutes to stand in line and eat. The cafeteria may be a little more crowded, but there are challenges to it. And I know that the state of Maine is looking at this statewide. Not everyone is they're very considering this very thoughtfully, because it does have an impact.
Great. And I know that there are advocates in Colorado that are interested in a time to eat policy too. So maybe in the future, Shannon, when you're here, we'll be talking about Colorado's approach to that as well. There's another question about food waste. And I think this is a really important topic to bring up, because food waste, the more students you feed, there's likely going to be more food waste, right? If I had a dinner party for 10 people, there would be less food waste than if I had 100 people at my dinner party. And so some people will latch on to the increase in food waste without using the denominator of total students served. And I think food waste was an issue before universal meal policies came on the scene as well. But any thoughts about minimizing food waste or talking about it to school stakeholders? I think, serving high quality and appealing meals to students is the #1 way to minimize that. But what other ideas do you have?
Well, back to providing enough time for them to eat.
Yes, that's another one.
We saw lots of waste with our shorter lunch periods. And we're moving towards milk dispensers. Milk is one area where we see a lot of waste. And Shannon, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, I agree with what you both said, 100% time and just, it's really about choices, right? Let the kids have the choices and let them pick their 3 components and educating your staff to not force them to take more than that, right? I can't tell you how many times I've been out to elementaries and they're like, you have to take a milk. No, you don't. And so it's really educating people, and then share tables. I don't know in Maine, Jeannie, if your team is allowed to do share tables, and it's really empowering. What do those share tables look like, and doing them correctly in a food safety, and then partnering with other partnerships that you can get that food waste out. It is a concern. We're all about making sure that we have the nourishment across the board, and we don't want to nourish trash cans, right? You guys have heard that several times. We want to nourish kids and people. And so, it's definitely a push. And how do we continue to monitor that? Anytime I get an intern, the first thing I'm doing is a plate waste study, and I want them talking to kids, and I want them talking, and they're like, it's my team's like, really, we're gonna have another intern go out and do another plate waste study? And it's like, a plate waste study should be going on constantly, because we're trying to figure out, why is that food going in the trash? And I think there's not one answer, like Jeannie said, there's several. We just love to give the kids choices. That's the biggest thing, because if they pick it, they're likely going to eat it.
And that's the beauty of the fruit and veggie bar, is that they can take what they want, and they're not being forced to have a full tray of food that half will go in the trash. The other part of plate waste for us is offering the students a variety of milk at lunch, white or chocolate. And they'll take the milk that they wish to have, not the milk that's forced on them. And we had a situation where white milk was the only choice offered, and the vast majority of the milk went in the trash. And when we went back to offering chocolate, they consumed what they wanted, and there was far less waste, and kids were getting nutrition.
Well, I think I loved the list that you provided, great ideas. I think also recess before lunch instead of after can be a way to minimize waste. Kids come to the cafeteria hungry after recess, and they're not trying to rush their lunch to get out onto the playground. So that's another idea. Okay, we had a couple more questions in the chat that I was hoping to get to, but I think we need to close because we're at time. Great discussion. I just want to thank both of you for the work that you do and the passion and excitement that you bring to the topic. And thanks for just being such a great champion for healthy school meals for all and sharing your tips for implementation, and definitely want to continue to learn from your programs and hear about all the things happening in the Aurora School District and across Maine. So thank you both. And for everyone who participated, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with the slides and any other resources that we can gather that were referenced here today. So thanks very much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.